The world is a confusing place, filled with all manner of shimmering distractions that take our conscious mind and our immortal souls and subvert them into the most basal of human emotions. Can any one of us, who considers ourselves a spiritual being, truly look around the carnival at the barkers, performers, and the caged animals and believe, even momentarily, that any of this is as it should be? My name is Alan Bishop, the alchemist of the Black Forest of Indiana, distiller, historian, occasional tinker, reenactor, and your host of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Have you ever noticed the world isn't quite what it presents itself to be? That something is just a little off kilter, just a little out of focus. Perhaps that movement you caught out of the corner of your eye was more than a shadow, that weight on your shoulder more than fatigue. I have lived my whole life like this, aware, awake, and waiting for the next experience, positive or negative. Always apprehensive, always analyzing. I believe that spiritual warfare is real. I believe from societal observation that others are becoming acutely aware. I believe that many are being influenced by forces unknown in a negative and spiritually deprived way. I see soft disclosure in every corner of pop culture. Join us as we pull back the curtain, as the veil thins, and reach with us into the ether to reclaim the truth on If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Hey guys, back with season 4 of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. And today we have one of my very best friends in the world, Erik Wolfe from Stoll and Wolfe Distillery out in Pennsylvania. Ironically, Erik and I had not ever really met in person until just recently at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And, you know, it was kind of bromance at first sight. So
It's so true. Especially my wife, just ask her. She's like, okay, your new girlfriend, or not girlfriend, boyfriend, but yes.
yeah, now you're going on this ghost show and wasted an hour on Friday. That's
Oh,
awesome.
she's happy to get rid of me. So in that way, that's no problem. But yeah.
But no, Erik and I really had a good time out at Mount Vernon, and as you guys will hear or have heard potentially on One Piece at a Time, Sacred and Profane, it was kind of a spiritual experience for me that led into some other spiritual experiences just a week later involving the band Blind Melon and visiting the grave of Shannon Hoon. But Erik and I were able to talk some real distilling and also some spiritual aspects and some personal aspects of life. And I really appreciate it. And I know that Erik has an open mind. The two of us didn't have that different of a childhood at all, being separated between Pennsylvania and Indiana, not truly very different at all. So I have not Erik has not briefed me on what he's going to talk about. I have not coached him on anything he's going to talk about. I just told him if he had any weirdness in his life or any spiritual things he wanted to talk about, or whether it involved distilling or didn't involve distilling, that's all good and it all fits the concept of this show. So with that being said, Erik, if you'd like to talk to people a little bit more about Stoll and Wolfe before we start and who you are, where you came from, your background, then we can go right into any of the high strangeness you want to talk about.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, again, meeting in person for the first time at Mount Vernon was definitely on such hallowed ground. And then, like I was saying to you, the first day we were working there rowing MASH, we've done this in another lifetime. So I don't know how or where. I believe I also followed that up immediately with, I'm sorry for whatever harebrained scheme I talked you into that got us killed in the last life, which I have no doubt you would have no trouble believing. So,
Well, there were for sure some heresies there or something. I'm positive of
yeah,
that.
exactly. Talking heliocentric universes or some. So thank you. So yeah, I'm part of the Wolfe in Stoll and Wolfe. I'm fortunate to work with my wife Aviana and my father Jim. And the Stoll and Wolfe is our partner, mentor, and friend, Dick Stoll. Dick unfortunately passed away about 3 years ago now, and oh man, what a great mentor to have! Just such a knowledgeable man, such a kind man, and definitely someone who really just had so much knowledge to bestow, but really was very generous of spirit in sharing, and certainly set the tone, I think, for a lot of our journey with Stoll and Wolfe, and so much of our journey with Stoll and Wolfe and distilling is, I don't know if you want to call it supernatural necessarily, but certainly some events that I can't necessarily explain that sort of guided us on our path and sort of have kept us on that path, where the origin of Stoll and Wolfe was my wife and I. Actually, this time of year, ironically enough, we were living in New York. I was born and raised in Lancaster County. Left Lancaster County, was living in New York City. Had met my wife, and we were considering coming back to Lancaster County to start a family. But for us, after living in New York for so long, the idea of going back to Pennsylvania for me was really exciting. For my wife, was kind of terrifying, having never lived outside of New York. So she was asking me as we're driving home from having spent Thanksgiving with my family here in Pennsylvania back to New York, well, what would we possibly do to be able to support ourselves if we moved back there? And yeah, it sounds like something out of a movie. It sounds like something I'm making up, but I kid you not, at that moment we were passing Distillery Road. It's the old Michter site. So I had looked up and I was like, well, actually, oddly enough, nobody is preserving that history in this area. And working in New York, there were a lot of people talking about Lancaster County heritage, Amish sort of craftsmanship, and with the whole sort of local food movement, a lot of people were championing these local food traditions. And in our area, because of prohibition, because of fears associated with the temperance movement, and people wanting to be good sort of productive members on the right side of society, a lot of that history was sort of swept under the rug. So for us to be able to reconnect with that history and have that journey start with that sort of odd moment was just kind of an interesting way to sort of kick things off. Little did we know that would ultimately lead to us meeting the last master distiller to have worked at the site where I had pointed to the sign, again, who was Dick Stoll. So for us, it was just a really cool coincidence. And then one of the first people to sort of support us in our journey along the way was Sam Komlenik, who's now associated with West Overton out in Western PA, actually the place where Old Overholt got its start. And Sam actually traces the birth of his whiskey journey back to stopping by Michter's, and they were actually closed down, and or I'm sorry, there were a few guys in a warehouse, excuse me, and he happened to stop by, see these guys emptying barrels, and this guy blew some dust out of a bottle, filled a bottle straight from a barrel and gave it to him. So when Sam ultimately heard that we were doing something and came back and sort of reconnected, it turns out that Dick Stoll was the guy who had filled that bottle for Sam all those years ago. So just the way that these journeys to preserve this legacy have all sort of intertwined, the way that they've all sort of fueled one another, the way that they've kind of branched off of one another is just a really cool thing. And for us, one of the slogans on our bottle is "United by Purpose Across Time." And for us, it's something we really believe strongly in, that we didn't invent any of this technology. We didn't create anything new. We're just trying to help preserve the nearly 3 centuries of folks that did work to create this technology and actually did create the reputation for Pennsylvania rye. So for us, it's truly a labor of love, but sometimes kind of heavy too, where you're like, wow, there's three centuries of people that you don't want to let down.
Yeah, a lot of synchronicities there, and I'm sure people who are listening who maybe don't necessarily follow the distilled spirits thing all that much, other than what they hear on this show. They certainly probably see the parallels between where I came from and where you came from with that, and that whole idea of the sacred and profane and being inspired by ghosts in a lot of ways. And I was actually thinking about this the other day with your slogan at the top of the Stoll and Wolfe bottles. And also like the little mini bottles that you have on screen right now, which I know listeners can't see, but I also love the Stoll and Wolfe font because it reminds me of the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein font so much.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was another weird one. So, and again, these things kept happening again and again. So, we're fortunate enough to work with this designer. I won't give out his name only because he's so awesome and he's already way too in demand. But really, really good dude. I'll give you his name privately if you'd like. But he and I started talking, and you just start talking to people to kind of give them references of where you're coming from and what you're trying to create, because he's the type of person who you can tell him what you're looking for and he'll come back and show you what you really meant when you were giving him the description initially. He's such a great designer that again he'll take that vision and really realize it. So when I was talking to him about some of what we were trying to create, some of it is based on, in our area, the Pennsylvania Dutch that emigrated to this area. They weren't Dutch, they were actually Swiss German. They were from the Palatinate region, came over, and a lot of those folks didn't really have a lot when they came over. They were tenant farmers, but the one thing they did bring over was a family Bible. And in that family Bible, in the margins, are essentially who begat who, and the different people and the children they had throughout the years. And it was their way of sort of keeping a family history, but it was in the margins of these family Bibles. So for us, not only the shape of our label, but the font is also meant in a lot of ways to evoke some of that tradition of these family Bibles, where it's not only sort of a memento from the past, but it's also this living thing that you're recording the ongoing history of your family in. Excuse me. So for us, really, the whole idea of incorporating the past, present, and future, as you and I talk about all the time, out that again, so many of these technologies come around, and the way they get used and the way they get interpreted, it's just so cool to get in the mind of some of these people in the past. And I think for us to be able to truly acknowledge those people, our thumper for our still is on a brick platform. And that brick from that platform is from a local distillery here that traces its roots back to the 1700s. And with that distillery, again, every drop of whiskey that we produce today is physically and literally supported by the bricks on this thumper platform. So for us, it's both a physical acknowledgement as well as sort of a metaphorical acknowledgement of how we're truly building upon the reputation they helped create. There's that great quote, and again, the internet is a scary place, so I think it's Newton, but again, it could have been Abraham Lincoln or Mayor McCheese for all I know. But I believe it's roughly, if I've seen farther, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. Again, something roughly like that. But for us, it's really just trying to uphold the legacy of people like Dick Stoll, of Charlie Beam that taught him, of the Bombergers that came before, the Shanks, there's so many names in there, and to be honest, many that were lost to history locally. In our area, I think they claim there were over 200 distilleries in Lancaster County in the 1800s, obviously of varying size, but most of those people will never be properly remembered. So for us,
Right.
just to have the opportunity to, in some small way, remember the ones that we can, and just kind of honor that art form that was at one point so vital and so important to the local economy, both in my area and yours, that was just lost. I mean, in many ways overnight. So for us to really honor that spirit and that legacy is very cool. And with so much of that stuff, people ask us how we came on this journey. And again, so much of this journey found us, where again, the things with Dick Stoll, where we were fortunate enough to meet through a friend and local historian, Ethan Smith, who introduced Dick and I. And again, then finding out, which wasn't really a surprise because this area is fairly small from a genealogy standpoint, and both of our families have been here for a long time, that ultimately we were distant cousins of Dick's, and that some of the cousins had been related to the Bomberger family that had distilled. And again, not crazy talk when you consider how many children people used to have and how few families there were. Ultimately, it was sort of a statistical sort of eventuality. Again, part of why I went to New York to meet my wife.
Right. Yeah,
So,
not crazy talk at all, but also, there's that whole thing of genetic memory and it's in the blood, and I'm sure that plays into it. And, with the bricks, kind of a reliquary or a shrine of sort. And the other part of what I was going to say a while ago was the one thing I always think about, and I've thought about this, I guess, since the first time I ever had a conversation with you, the United by Purpose Across Time thing. In my head, I don't know why, and it's so funny because I think you were the first one to make a joke about this movie when we were hanging out in Mount Vernon, but you made a Back to the Future joke, and I always, for some reason in my head, because of that slogan that you guys have, I've always thought of you and Dick as like Marty and Doc. So
that's one of the coolest things anyone's ever said to me. That movie, when I think that movie came out around 1985, so I was like 7.
Mm-hmm.
So that movie was like so influential to me at the time, where I was like, oh man, that's
why me and Wayne from Ozark Steelworks are still naming pieces of equipment after that show.
That's fantastic. And it's so funny because when we were down at Mount Vernon, I did think to myself, you know what, sometimes the flux capacitor does get up to speed, where you just for split seconds are transported back. And that's where we also have the opportunity to sort of tie in another piece of local history, was that my 8-time great-grandfather, so great times 8 grandfather, my dad's 7-time great-grandfather, basically got a farm, got a land grant patent from the Penn family back in, I believe it was 1741. So that farm is still in my family today. My cousins, Wes, Erik, and Craig Klein still farm that, and Erik's son has actually started farming there as well. So I believe that makes him the 9th generation to work that land. So they let us come and help when they're doing harvest and planting seed. And again, they're doing all the real actual farming work. We're there just helping, trying not to get in the way, trying not to lose any limbs. But for me, it's just such an amazing thrill to be on that land. It's sort of the way that you and I probably not laugh, but we marvel when people want to come in and take vacation to come work with us and help bottle or do whatever. We're like, oh, that's fantastic. I think that's the way they feel about when I want to come work on the farm, where they're like, okay, sure. Like if you want to, fine. But again, just knowing that, again, things that my family ate for generations are, somehow in me, that's in that land, that to be able to turn that into whiskey and is just truly for us a special and sacred sort of opportunity. Yeah. So for us, it's just the culmination of a lot of sort of weird things that over time we couldn't really have laid out when we first sort of thought of the distillery, but ultimately just kept revealing themselves to the point where it's still happening. That, I know, you and I were talking about potentially a historic method of distilling, and the local director of our historical society
just randomly finds a treasure trove for you.
Yeah, my dad an early Christmas present, and he's like, I'm sorry, do you have 5 minutes to come upstairs and look in our archives? Which, I'm sorry, anytime someone asks me to come distill at Mount Vernon or look in a historical archive, I don't care what's going on, I have time for that.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah. reason like 10,000, I'm not in the ambulance corps or a firefighter. They'd be like, "Where's Eric?" "Oh, he's looking at some old stuff in a garage somewhere."
And you and I had literally been talking about that for a few days right before that all went down too, which is crazy.
And then it revealed itself like that, where again, it sounds crazy. And if I heard someone else talking about it, I'd be like, okay, yeah, whatever, weirdo. And full disclosure for people that can't see, I've got long hair tied up into a man bun. So people are already kind of giving me side eye when I talk about these things. Like, yeah, okay, whatever, dude. But it just happens so frequently that after a while, you just kind of embrace it. And then the other thing that's kind of crazy too is just
it almost becomes normative for people like you and I think, right? Because
it does. I mean, and I have conversations on a daily basis with my partner and again, mentor and friend who's been gone for 3 years. But in my head, I'm constantly thinking to myself about what would he do? What would he have said in this moment if he were here to see this? So again, it's so much of what I do is out of time. And that's where speaking with Brian Cushing, I believe his last name. Yeah.
Victorian Barroom. Yeah.
Victorian Barroom. If anyone's listening, highly recommend, check it out. Brian, awesome dude. Talking to him just about his fascination with the Victorian period and just how some of us just feel almost more comfortable in other era, not in the other era, but just you almost feel out of place.
Well, and to add to that too, Eric, I don't know if you ever heard it, but I did a field recording with Brian for this show, I think for season 1 out at Spring Mill. And there was a bit of a high strangeness event in his life as a child that led him down that path.
That's so interesting.
So, and I think that's a funny thing too. So, because so much of like, there's so many of these, paranormal ghost hunting shows and this, that, and the other. Not that I'm not into that, right? For all the things on this show that are like that and are very on the nose, these conversations, like what we're having now, and this idea of the land having power and of, genetic memory and, all the crafts that have been in your family for years, or the friendships you make and the people who pass away, that it doesn't have to be an actual ghost standing at the foot of your bed, right? It's literally the quintessence, a piece of the quintessence of a person or a place that's just hanging around, not in any creepy way, but it can be a little draining. Like you said, it can be a weight on your shoulders to some degree, for sure. But as you were saying, the local historical society, they found this thing that just matched up perfectly with exactly what you and I were talking about. And they called you to come look at it.
Well, and I think to your point, it's really trying to just be open to those coincidences that I know I'm so guilty with the distillery of there's so many things to do. And so often in life, I'd like to take a step back and really appreciate the grandeur of what's happening and the amazing thing that we're building. But so often there's mash to be mashed. There's mash to be drained. There's a tank to be drained. And I think with so much of that, I know after Dick passed, it was so hard and so many people were so upset. And I was saying at actually his memorial, I almost felt lucky in that I got to go in the next day and honor him in the best way I knew how, which was make whiskey. Which, if he heard me sitting around talking about him and his legacy and whatever, he'd be like, "There's whiskey to make. What the hell are you doing?" yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you think I'm awesome. Get back to work.
Keep
and in
moving.
A good way. Like his eye would have twinkled and he would have winked at me when he said it. But truly with that, just the ability to honor people through that hard work and through the repetition of that skill and through in so many ways. I know something you and I talked about quite a bit at Mount Vernon, which again, huge shout out to Steve Bayshore for the opportunity for guys like Alan and I to go down there and for people like us to meet and be able to talk, and his ability to coalesce people and how special all of that is there, and just reminded there of how important it is as a artisanal producer to really use your 5 senses to, which is something as kids is kind of, I know as a parent, I used to joke most of parenting is take that out of your mouth and don't touch that. but as an artisanal producer, you need to put it in your mouth.
Doing all those things.
You need to touch it. You need to stare at it. You need to smell it. All the things as kids that we're taught not to do. And I think just, to me, that communion, that physical communion across time and space of smelling whiskey that someone else would have smelled, getting the sensation on your tongue of the heads versus tails, or the just having that kinship across craft is so amazing and so cool. And just being able to talk to, again, even so many of the people who came through Mount Vernon that really are so attracted to these crafts of the past, or trades that really in the modern world are not necessarily economically viable. I mean, they are, because there's some really amazing people doing amazing products, but it's not like something that they have programs where you go to school for that. You kind of have to go your own way with it.
No, and even if there were, say, modern distilling programs, they're not necessarily going to teach you that sort of thing. And this, I think, sorry to interrupt, Eric, but I think this actually points to a valid point about the whole idea of the ghost thing too, right? I don't think, and we'll take whiskey out of the equation, I don't think you could sew a fantastic blanket if you didn't have a ghost sitting next to you.
Well, and that's, I mean, so much of it too is just those inspirations, those, again, where's that coming from? And again, I don't know. I'm not but I can't tell you how often things, and my dad talks about this, that his grandfather taught him that as well, that if you go to sleep sort of with a problem and truly sleep on it, so often you do wake up with a solution. And again, just that sort of, I don't know, it was interesting. I was watching a thing on the universe with my daughter, and they were talking about these filaments in space. And she's like, wow, that really looks like a brain if you sort of, I was like, yeah, I mean, it truly is amazing. So I do think, as much as a lot of people will look at people like you and I and think it's crazy that, I'm not saying I'm Patrick Swayze is not molding the pot as
right.
As Unchained Melody plays, or maybe he is, I don't know. But that said, I think all the time about the folks that came before and what they would have done in these instances.
Exactly.
Classic example. So how many times have you fixed something with Salto paste?
Right.
What's a better alternative in certain situations than using the Salto to fix something where it works? That's what they would have done.
That's what you have.
One of my proudest moments in the distillery was using rye straw as flagging in the barrel to help fix a leak, where I was like, damn, of course that's what they would have done, because that's what was on hand.
Yeah.
So just that kingship of being wet and tired and getting burned and just generally being over it. It's funny, so many of those moments in distilling, I think, amongst other distillers, we'd all agree it's what makes you really a distiller.
Yes.
But there are also moments where I feel such kinship with, and in our distillery, I mean, obviously we have electricity. We're not that old school, but from a crossing time or a thin place standpoint, there's a church bell that rings it the same as it would have rang for the last few hundred years in our town. That again, when you're in the distillery and you're running and things are quiet and you hear that church bell, or you hear the train whistle coming through, or there's a pretzel bakery that's 250 something years old in our town, you smell those smells or hear those, it really is in some ways a thin place. And again, I know you and I talked about this as well, creating those thin places for people with whiskey in terms of oh man, that smell reminds me of that time that my dad and I sat down and we had this conversation, or man, at my wedding, people opened a bottle that smelled just like this, or just those moments when we had the opportunity to try those pre-prohibition whiskeys, the thought of the people who bottled that whiskey, the thought of the people who enjoyed similar whiskeys, it really is such a connection, and a connection from a sensory standpoint that not to get too geeky and too excitable about it, but very few things have the power to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's truly what alchemy is, especially when it comes to distillation. Pulling out the pure essence of what that spirit is, not the purity of spirit as far as the amount of ethanol, but the purity of spirit as far as representing the grain and the place and the people and all of those things. And to be able to go back and taste something over 100 years old is pretty damn special.
When I know we've talked about this quite a bit as well, but just the only other thing I can think of that endures like that is music, where to be able to hear, and I guess just something that can remain the same over such a long period of time, but you sort of have the opportunity to interact with it in different places. And I guess there are other art forms that do have that, but just in modern pop culture, music seems to be the one thing that so many of us can sort of relate to. I don't know, painting or sculpture aren't nearly as sort of relevant as influences these days. But in general, with music, and even just, I'm sure it's happened to you many times in your life, but good music and its ability to give you goosebumps.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it just, that feeling sort of in your gut of, it was funny, we had the chance, we had the chance to visit Portugal, and we were there, they were talking about this, I'm sure I'll mispronounce it, but this feeling of, I believe they call it saudade, which they were like, well, it's this feeling of longing and this sort of emptiness inside. You Americans, you don't have a word for it. And they're like, but it's also a style of music. And I was like, well, no, we do. It's called the blues. And they're like, no, but it's this thing. It's like this deep sadness inside that I was like, yeah, no, we call it the blues. And they're like, no, but it's like sometimes you don't mind it. It's like kind of this feeling that you enjoy, like a feeling of missing home. I was like, no, we have that. We call it the blues. So anyway, it's just sort of funny. But they claim that I think a lot of it was the sailors leaving Portugal and just that longing for home and the longing for the way things were. And I think that, I don't know, it's just so interesting the way that there is sort of this desire to go back in many ways and sort of recapture those. And for me, whiskey's done that in so many different ways, but talking to folks so often even about sensory analysis and the way that can transport you to another time or place. And the one that had always really spoken to me was it sounds so strange, but I would talk to people about when I was growing up, I would come visit my dad, and I would stay in my grandmother's house, and the room I stayed in over the summer, the attic, it was basically at the foot of the attic stairs, and the attic stairs led up to the led up to the attic, obviously, attic stairs, that's why they were called that, but they would have this fan that they would run over the summer, sort of before central air, and it would suck out all the hot air. But for me as a kid, again, talking about ghost stories, where laying there as a kid, falling asleep, like watching this attic door as this is, again, this fan and just thinking about all the creepy stuff up there. And of course it's an older house and it's hot over the summer and things are creaking and settling. But that smell of that attic and my grandmother's attic always was just a particular smell for me. And the more I started to do sensory analysis with whiskey, the more it reminded me of that. And I would mention that to people on tours, just the way there's so many primary aromas, so few primary flavors, and the way you can pull a lot more out of whiskey from aroma than you can sometimes flavor, particularly if you're new.
So funny to hear you say that too, because there's a specific thing that I pick up in certain whiskeys and certain brandies, especially old ones, because I have that exact same thing, but it's with the smell of a specific cellar or a basement from when I was a kid at my babysitter's house. And if I smell rancio in a whiskey, which is a positive thing, it's immediately right there. I know exactly, it's walking down those steps and into that basement.
Well, and it's so funny that you say that, because so often for me, I'll associate a smell or a song with a place just because it's where I I experienced it. And
Right.
it's funny, as a kid, my mom would always make fun of me because at the dinner table, when I was eating or drinking something, I would close my eyes. And she's like, where are you going? What are you doing? And as a kid, I didn't have the vocabulary to describe it, but those flavors, those aromas were truly transporting me. And I was trying to focus on what I was getting out of that.
Yeah.
And just the different flavors and smells. But what was amazing then is one day reading an article and talking to tour groups about this sort of sensory analysis and the smell of my grandmother's attic. One of the tour groups suggested that maybe my grandmother was drinking whiskey in the attic, which I was like, okay, fair enough.
Right.
I don't think that's what was happening, but good suggestion. Reading an article though, and it turns out, and it makes perfect sense, where books were made of paper. Paper is made of wood pulp, particularly
Lignin,
older books. That lignin degrading in the heat of the attic, again, that same
Makes
thing,
sense.
very similar to a barrel. So also just very interesting when we talk to people about sensory analysis and experiencing whiskey, so often you see them get transported and they'll pull a smell or a flavor, and again, they'll go back to a certain time or place in their life. And for us, it is, in some way, it's very mystical in that you're creating, as I was saying before, just this thin place that
Yeah.
they're transported across time back to that spot, and then forever after, that sense memory is then intertwined with our spirit
Yep.
that we created. So for us to be able to have an art form to be able to practice that both ties to the past as well as creating new memories for people now is just, I don't know. I'm sure I'm waxing too poetic about
No, this
having
is
yeast create ethanol, but it really, to me, is, I don't know. I can't think of a better way to.
these are the conversations, Eric, that make life worth living for people like you and I. So you're not at all waxing too poetic at all in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you. And with so much of it too, it just, at the end of the day, and again, something so many of us talk about, there are those memes online where it's like what my friends think I do, and it's Harry Potter, it's some wizard doing crazy stuff, and it's what I really do, and it's like the janitor from the Nevermind video.
Right.
It's so much of what we do is really a lot of work, that you're hot, you're wet, you're cold. It's never comfortable, and there's not a whiskey board coming in to check on you to make sure that there's integrity in your products.
No. Yeah, it doesn't exist. I feel like maybe I might be more like the janitor from Scrubs. Like I'm pranking you, but I'm doing it so you learn as you go.
Yes, exactly. There's a lesson in there. There's a method to the, well, and with so much of it too, so often there's nobody there saying, well, you have to do it the way that they used to do it, or you have to do it the way that they used to do it, plus the little bit of new knowledge to make it better for your customers. That's sort of the discipline, and to me,
Well, I think that's where you and I are alike as well. I think you and I, we have set our own rules in this industry in a lot of ways, right? And yes, you're playing into the heritage of Pennsylvania, and I'm playing into the heritage of Indiana. But there was when it comes to what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, you had the levity of owning your place and being able to lay out the rules as long as it makes money and it makes good product, right? I don't own anything, but I had the levity to lay out the rules for what we do at Spirits of French Lick. So you constantly do that thing of like, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, what would me from 10 years ago do here, right? Versus what me from now would do here.
no, it's so true, and so often, I always say too, it's one thing to, it's so often when people are talking about work-life balance, they're like, well, you need to make sure that you're home more and you need to spend time with family, and nobody ever is on their deathbed saying they wish they worked more. And that's true. And I'm not advocating less work-life balance. I think people should, their family is awesome and it's so important, and it's why I do everything I do. But with distilling, the answer I've given back to people is, okay, nobody says they wished they worked more when they're on their deathbed, but no distiller says they wish they laid down less barrels.
Right.
And my work will outlive me. The things that I'm doing now, God willing, for a long time from now, very far away from now. I don't want anyone posting this ironically like a year from now, but that said, many years from now, after I was a head in a jar for decades, that basically, again, that work will live on, and that
It is
hopefully
one of the very few crafts that hits on a large enough level still to this day, on a large enough human emotional level, that you certainly can create a legacy doing this without a doubt, right? Some memory of who and what you did, what you stood for, why you did the things the way you did, etc. Whether it's through the actual whiskey in the bottle, whether it's around 100 years from now, or it's through the information you passed on to someone else, who they passed on to someone else, or even writing or any of those things.
no, it's so true. And even some of the stuff, I know you and I have talked about this, where you feel like you're saving some information from obscurity. Where
Yes.
if we weren't fortunate enough to work with Dick, so much of that information would have been lost forever. And it really, I worry so much about how often, like our local historical society was fortunate enough to get those drawings and to be able to share them. But how often does somebody not take those to the local historical society, or how often does the local historical society not have someone who cares or who can recognize what something is? And how many times have those things just been truly lost forever? Which,
Yeah.
again, I try not to think about that, but statistically it seems to happen more often than not.
It definitely does. That's one of the reasons I'm super excited to get out to Pennsylvania to hang out with you sometime soon, because as you and I have talked about a little bit already in person, my region of Indiana, part of my region was settled by, the second sons of the people that came from your region. And I have argued for a very long time that the ghosts that we have here, as far as distilling goes, and the things that I'm trying to save in the Black Forest region, have a lot more to do with what was happening in Pennsylvania and Maryland, as well as in the Black Forest of Germany, than they do with anything really happening in central Kentucky.
No, it's so interesting how those things follow a path, and how so often nowadays the idea of producing things in a artisanal way, and not just an artisanal way, but sometimes in an inefficient way, is sort of a modern luxury. I don't think a lot of people in the past had the ability to say, well, my yield's going to be half, but I think the marketing will be good. Those people were really only trying to make as much quality whiskey as they could, basically so that they could feed their families and not starve at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So taking risks was something that you did very slowly and very cautiously over time. I mean, I don't know that you had a lot of farmers taking really huge risks with the way they did stuff until they saw other people do it. And I think farming and distilling are so closely intertwined, where so often with distilling, you'll see that where people want to say, well, when did this new technology replace the old one?
Right.
And there was no date where they sent out a letter saying, hey, everyone, by this date, this is the Y2K of pot distilling, and you need to be on this new technology by, and if you have a column still, it's so, again, it's what region were you in?
Yeah.
What type of spirit were you producing? What generation were you? Because if you were 8th generation, you probably were more beholden to a previous technology than you were
to anything new coming in. Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's it. And again, people talk about new like it's always seen as better, but can you imagine the first person that said, oh, hey, I'd like to bring live steam into the distillery that could potentially be a bomb? It's going to be better in the long run, but we have to put in all this piping. Oh, and if it goes wrong, it's going to explode and kill us all.
Or imagine the workload of something like this too, Eric. This is something that occurred to me recently in the same kind of vein, right? So, and with not being wasteful and not taking risks, the apple brandy producers here in the Black Forest region, again, related more closely to what you guys are doing, in my opinion, and obviously sometimes even blood related, I believe. We've talked about, there's generational distillery that was here that was owned by some Wolfes as well in Orange County. But you look at apples don't produce every year, and these guys tied up hundreds of acres in apples that aren't good to eat out of hand. They were for brandy production, right? So you have a really good year and you go, all right, normally we'd be making 1,000 barrels a year from August till January, but we got enough apples this year that we're going to make 2,000 barrels. And I think we might get some shipments of apples from, upriver and bring those in because next year the weather might just absolutely destroy us, but we got to get through it. So we have stuff for next year.
No, it's and also even just that diversity of one family being able to grow something different, where so often it's like, okay, well, our rye failed. Well, if your rye failed, there's a chance that the rye, next farm over failed. Mm-hmm. So by having some apples, some rye, some wheat, some corn, just to have that that diversity in the field, just so that you have different things coming out at different times. Also, I think for so many of the people in our area, the idea of having your own land and the idea of having so much that you've produced that you actually have something left over and had to figure out what to do with it, right, must have been kind of overwhelming at first, just because everyone that came over in my family were all tenant farmers, mm-hmm, from the Palatinate. So to be able to come here and have a family farm, do the backbreaking labor of clearing that land, even more backbreaking labor of planting and harvesting, and then you're lucky enough by the grace of God to get that stuff out of the field, there was no way you were going to let it go to waste in any way. So for these people too, I would think the distilling was in some way they had to just be so thankful that they had the opportunity to have a bountiful enough crop to be able to do that.
Yeah. I absolutely 100% agree with that completely. And again, those are ghosts in a way too. They're not ghosts as in they show up and they say boo. They're ghosts of a different type. They're quintessence basically. But I did want to touch go back and touch on something here too, because one of the metaphors that you and I have in common that we commonly use is the connection to music. And I agree with you. So I even think that applies to, they say taste change over time, right? So like you might try whiskey some point or some spirit that you initially don't like. And then years later you come back to it and you're like, oh, no, I like this and I get it, right? I'm not entirely convinced that, just like with music, I'm not entirely convinced that your taste changed. It evolved and it became something new and something different, right? And I've often made playlists whenever I'm making a new product. Like, here's what I want this product to represent, is this list of 7 or 8 songs or whatever it ends up being, and then end up naming the product and it's named after a song that wasn't even on the playlist. It was like the Fascination Street Absinthe, which was barrel-aged absinthe, and that was literally like, how should this make you feel? Well, it should drink like a bourbon, but be an absinthe. And it should be that drink that you have at the end of the night, which is the last drink. And it applies to the lyric, waiting for you to kick the last nail in.
No, that's so fantastic. And I think with so much of that too, it's funny. My daughter's 13 and they have this expression, it's a whole mood, or it's a vibe, it's it's whatever the hell they're saying. It's a whole vibe, where I'm like, isn't everything a vibe at the end of the day? Like, I don't understand what's not a vibe. Where I feel like for people like you and I, you're constantly thinking about the context of things and how does one thing inform another. And just, to me, good art is something, and wow, what a pompous thing to say. Good art is, hopefully, so quote this when you're, posting the podcast. To Erik Wolfe, good art is, no, but I think the mark of something that it has artistic merit is that you can come back to it at multiple points in your life, and you bring yourself to it, and the things that you pull out of it are always different depending on what you're bringing to it. And I think so often with spirits, it's very similar to music in that sometimes, like having your barrel-aged absinthe, I'm going to forever associate that with one of the first nights of us all having worked together at Mount Vernon, sitting there with Laura and enjoying that. So now, for me, some of that enjoyment is going to forever be remembering that time.
That moment.
It's almost like seeing a band in concert where you're like, wow, I really like that album. But man, having seen it and like the smell and the just all the senses of the man that I was there. Like
Mm-hmm.
so for me too with some of the spirits and that's the other thing with having friends in the industry, it's like it's hard sometimes to separate those spirits from those times or those people, which is an amazing thing to do. And then it almost becomes to me where because the music of the 90s, some of the 80s, but definitely 90s was so formative for me in high school that I can't tell if some of it sucks, is amazing, or
I've had
it's
that
just
thought.
nostalgia.
Yes.
And now with spirits, I'm more trained in sensory analysis. With music,
Right.
I don't have that ability. But with some of nostalgia, it gets so wrapped up in the enjoyment of it that there's certain spirits that I don't necessarily enjoy from a sensory standpoint as much as others, but they do remind me
Yeah.
of a previous time that
I mean,
I've enjoyed them.
I
So,
got.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. You made me laugh because I was just sitting there thinking, no, you're right when it comes to the music thing, but I think that that's kind of a truism too. So like, I don't know, like I don't feel like, you grew up in the 90s and I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s. I don't feel like there's ever going to be a moment where I'm like, hey, you know what I'm really craving right now? Some peppermint schnapps.
Exactly. Well, no, and we were talking about Nine Inch Nails before. Again,
Right.
in high school, and not that I don't like Nine Inch Nails,
Yeah.
but as you were saying, if Nine Inch Nails came out today, I don't know that that would be something that I'd be like, oh, I got to get that album.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's very anti the man. It turns out I've become the man in some ways, which is a very uncomfortable shift in and of itself. But
Well, there's also that weirdness of getting older and taste changing and or evolving, right? So like here's the other thing with Nine Inch Nails, and I just use them as an example, and all due respect to Trent Reznor, an amazing songwriter, etc. But there's also something weird about like, like hampered growth. Like I don't like even new albums that come out from him. Like I listen to them, and I'm like, dude, come on, you're 60, quit it.
and it's funny because my wife was just asking me the other day. She's like, I heard Andre 3000 has a new album out. What is it? So I was like, well, it's mostly flute music. And she just laughed because she thought I say crazy things all the time. And I was like, no, but seriously, that's where he's at right now. And again,
It's his thing,
to
yeah.
me, the coolest thing is just that he has the guts to just be like, you know what? This is where I'm at. Like, this is
Yeah.
authentically what I'm doing.
What
and
I'm
now,
into.
whether or not people want to support that from a financial standpoint is, I guess, a whole nother thing.
Right.
But from an artistic standpoint, I always respect somebody.
Well, and so
doing
much.
the-
So
sorry,
much-
go ahead.
You're good, man. I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry. I was just you trigger all these thoughts in my head while you're talking. So like sitting there thinking, they're always going to buy his flagship, right? Just like you have a flagship whiskey, right? And that flagship whiskey will fund, if you wanted to do who knows what. Maybe you wanted to do chartreuse, right? You know that you're never going to compete with chartreuse, but no, that's where I'm at today. I'm going to make chartreuse today because the mainline whiskey, as long as I have enough of that in production, I can afford to take a day and make chartreuse.
It's so true, and I think with so much of that, it's that sort of that same curiosity, that same sort of desire to test yourself and be like, huh, I wonder if I could do that.
Yeah. And the flute
And then-
music might influence something on the next album that becomes a flagship too. Like it might apply in ways that he hadn't even considered.
Well, and I think that's so much of it too, that truly artistic people will always acknowledge that there are these things where some people hold on to ideas because they're worried that there won't be another one. I think so many of the rest of us are like, you know what, I got to get this idea out because there's another 1,000 behind it. I don't know what they are, but they're going to keep coming. So I got to get these out or I'm going to back up the other ones that are going to come out as a result of this. And I'm as surprised by what they are as anyone else. Like when someone's like, oh, hey, you're working on this project, where I'm like, oh, yeah, I am. I didn't expect that to happen, but I'm super psyched it is. And it fits in with the larger idea of the curiosity and the history. So
It's that's so absolutely true. And I think particularly of people like you and I'm not sure that everyone in the industry is like this. In fact, I know they're not, but I think that's part of the connection that you and I have is that we are both like that. There's always a million ideas. There's always another, I tell Kim, it's like, even naming spirits after some of the people I've named them after, I feel like I get done with one, and then that one goes and taps another one on the shoulders, like, "Hey, go get in his ear," and maybe he'll name something after you. So I'm constantly with these ideas. I have to get them out of my head, just like you. And sometimes I go, "Oh, that's a really good one. I should hold on to for when I own something to make money off of." And then the rest of them, I'm like, "All right, for every one that I keep, I'm kicking 10 of them out for free to somebody somewhere, or giving them out in consultation or something like that, because I have to get it out there. Otherwise, I'll be sitting there going, not today. Let's not. And I don't want to have those conversations of not today with myself.
No, it's so true. And even I think that vulnerability to be creative, and that vulnerability with yourself, that vulnerability in terms of the community of your peers, the vulnerability of what the critics are going to say in our industry or any other, where not everything is going to be a home run, and it shouldn't be, because if it is, then you're not, one of two things is happening: you're not challenging yourself, or people are just bought the hype completely, and then everything you do is amazing. Then come on, how great could any of it really be?
Yeah. And sometimes the things that catch are just flukes.
Well, that's the other thing. And a buddy of mine, who actually helped in many strange ways set me off on this journey as well. He's a fellow distiller, Corey Mason, who he also was very key in me accepting the idea that every idea has its time, and that, again, here we go. We'll go back to the future as we bring everything around here. When he's playing the Chuck Berry, and they're looking at him like he has 10 heads, and he's like, you guys aren't ready for that yet, but your grandkids are going to love it.
Yep.
It's not that the Chuck Berry stuff that he was playing was bad. It was, and we all know it's amazing. It just, the cultural references, the influences, what people were ready for weren't there yet. So I just think as a creative person, so often it's none of my business even what people think of the things I do. I just got to get them out, and then they can decide what it is. But so often just maintaining that vulnerability to create in a world where it's all too easy to get feedback, good or bad, or it's all such an echo chamber, or
yes,
as you know, in our industry, there's sort of media darlings, and that's awesome. There should, and so many of those people who get recognition work their asses off to get it. That's, I'm not denigrating anyone for, but so often when people are doing best of lists, or they're doing whatever reviews, or even deciding what to review, they go to the same few things again and again. And again, I think because on their end, it takes a certain vulnerability to review things that are out of the norm. And to be fair, they have to review things people can buy readily and that are readily available. But just on the whole creative side, whether it be those of us creating it, those of us critiquing it, those of us consuming it, again, just the reminder of the vulnerability that goes into all of it, and the fact that no one should have to overpay for shitty whiskey. The fact that I made it myself should never be an excuse to drink something that is less than fantastic. But also, that's also a challenge sometimes, is getting people to try things that they're just slightly out of the norm. And I know even producing rye, most of the whiskey made in this country is bourbon. So sometimes for folks, even for them to wrap their mind around a rye, or they'll really like our rye, which is fantastic. But as we remind them, that's one rye. There's an infinite number of variations on that rye. So love it or hate it, it's representative of a style. And it's only representative of one style that we even produce. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just such a fascinating industry to be involved in, and definitely something that, I don't know, constantly is teaching me that I know nothing, and also really exciting that I can spend forever and not learn it all.
Well, I think what you're doing in Pennsylvania is you're capturing the ghost of that state in a bottle and giving it life again, first and foremost. And to touch on your awards comment, the other part of that too is, if you're a true creative, and not to put any guilt on anyone's shoulders anywhere in the world out there, but if you're a true creative, there will come a moment where when you do win some of those awards over time, you'll start to feel a little dirty about it. And you'll also like there, I don't know if this is true of you or not, Eric, but like there comes a point too where you don't even want to talk about like old projects. Like even if that's your flagship thing, like there's some part in my brain that has trouble like differentiating like, okay, now we have to, it's almost like downshifting, right? You have to
Oh,
downshift and go back and go, okay, let's talk about the thing that I did 5 years ago that I haven't really put any thought into other than keeping quality up for the past, 6 months or whatever.
it's so true. And I think that's where, for us, so much of what we do, we live in I mean, it's not me saying this, it's everyone, but we live in a world of instant gratification. So for us, so many of our projects, it takes years for them to come to fruition, even from the planning stage, but then from when it goes into the barrel, years after that to be able to see the fruit of that labor. So, and then it's funny too, because we do get a lot of people who do recognize us for the quality of the whiskey. And then the funniest thing that happens to me mentally is you're like, wow, I really respected that reviewer. And then they said how great our whiskey is. What do they know? You know what I mean? It's just so
Right.
funny how that happens. Or you get recognition where you're like, oh, I thought that was a reputable group. Now they think we're good. How great of a group could that be? But I do chalk that up to Dick's amazing talent, not anything I'm doing. But no, it's just interesting with those things, and even the fact that, to be honest, it's great to win awards in whiskey, and it's awesome to be recognized. But at the end of the day, should there be awards for whiskey?
Right. Yeah. You're not curing
It's
cancer. It's
the
just
award
whiskey.
is that somebody's buying it and they're enjoying it. To me, I mean,
Mhm.
and maybe that's me being whatever, not or just a small producer, and that's not. But truly, to me, it's not. I think if you're getting into whiskey, I mean, I'm a competitive person. I don't care what it is. I want to do it as well as I can. I'd like to do it better than other people. But what is better in an art form? And people say that to me all the time. Well, what's the best whiskey you make? I'm like, what's your favorite kid? And some people have a quick answer for that. I'm like, all right, that's some whatever. That's some
Yep.
family dysfunction. I don't want to know about that. I was expecting you to say I love them all equally for different reasons. And again, who's better, the Who, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones? What? And I've also had people go, oh, well, clearly the answer is, where I'm like, no, you're missing the point that
Yep.
they're all better for different reasons, different contexts, different. So that's the thing for us too, that's always just really interesting and fun, is to talk to other distillers and just see how they're coming at certain things. And there is so much science and so much math driving everything we do, but because it's nearly impossible in a production run to isolate a single variable, there's so much sort of mysticism and so much superstition that do come into the industry. So for me, it's I don't know, it's just so much fun to see that superstition, the actual science behind it, and then ultimately the enjoyment of the people, and just sort of the alchemy of those different bits and the way they come together. And this is something I'm sure we can do a whole nother episode on, but just again, we've talked about before, intention and the importance of intention behind something.
Hmm.
And just how I don't know that me trying to in some way channel the past, or that I'm attempting to, and I don't think about us being the owners of any legacy. I just see us as being the current stewards of it. I mean, that's how we see the house that my wife and I happen to live in, is an old farmhouse that the base of the house is from the early 1860s. And again, I happen to have the house, but I'm just the current custodian of it.
Right.
I mean, it will be someone else's someday. God willing, they'll love it as much as we do and have as many amazing memories here. But I think also some of it is even just the timeline on which you look at things. And sometimes I think to some folks it's really scary to think of yourself as just one link in a really long chain. But for me, I find that really comforting. I find it, to me, to be a single sort of thing is I I don't know, that's scary, and how do you process that? But to be something part of larger than yourself that sort of was here before you were and will be here long after.
Hmm.
I don't know. That to me is the closest thing to immortality. I think my tiny brain can process.
No, absolutely. I agree. I agree. Well, I do have one more sort of philosophical question for you, Eric, before we wrap this up. So, one of the things that I'm a very big believer in, and don't get me wrong here, I know alcohol causes more than its fair share of problems, and I truly understand that. I think that's kind of the worst nightmare that any distiller has, is that someone takes your product and uses it in a negligent way, right? But
For sure.
all you ever hear anymore, it seems like, is specifically from global organizations. I won't say any of their names, but it's just how negative alcohol is and how harmful it is for the body and how harmful it is for your soul and all that stuff. I am not a believer in that in any way, shape, or form. And I firmly believe that alcohol, when used properly and responsibly, can be a little bit of a door opener. Now, you can open the door way too far, or you can even kick the door off the hinges, and it obviously becomes an issue. But I'm curious what your take is on that, because I know you and I share some ideas about how certain things might be here as door openers.
And I think that's a great question. I think for us, we always talk about it that it's interesting. In Europe, they don't seem to have the same ills with alcohol that we do. And I don't know if some of that was not allowing prohibition to happen, that some of those long-standing traditions sort of existed. And also I think in Europe, there's a lot of people who, it's multi-generational sort of, you're living together and hanging out together.
Right.
So there's the ability to learn to drink with the social pressure of grandparents and aunts and uncles and just learning to drink at a younger age in a social context where I think so often when folks do consume alcohol in a negligent way, it's the alcohol is sort of a whatever they're drinking is an alcohol delivery device. It just
Right.
the flavor is an obstacle, and they just want the intoxication or the inebriation. Where we always really advocate the European model, which is to increase conviviality and to drink just enough that, as you were saying, you feel that sort of warm glow and you feel more kinship, more companionship, more like sharing your day and less going off in your own head, less sort of again, less getting lost and more finding one another. And I think so much of that too is even the setting where people are, sorry about that, that's
It's
my
all good.
attack dog. My wife is coming home from my family makes so much Thanksgiving dinner that we have to have 2 meals
Yep.
to actually enjoy it all. So they just came back from leftover. I can
Nice.
back up so we can edit that part out.
Oh, you're good, man. We'll leave it in there. Ain't nothing wrong with that. It actually didn't cover up you talking. So
Oh, awesome. So, and with so much of that, it's really the setting and the conviviality of it, where, again, to have multiple generations enjoying together, and the idea that the alcohol is really just removing those barriers that can sometimes separate people, or that sort of instinct not to share, or that instinct sometimes to not open up that we all have. And truly enjoying the flavor of what's been produced, I think is just so different. And again, having a 13-year-old daughter, it's one of those things where whatever your parents do is like the least cool thing ever. So thankfully for her, alcohol is like the least sexy, cool thing ever. It's just what her parents do. But some of that for us too is not unintentional. We're just desensitizing to her, excuse me for lack of pronunciation, to sort of the mystery of alcohol, or to the fact that it's this secretive, strange thing that adults can only have and do weird. I mean, it should be consumed by responsible adults, but you know what I mean? That is this adult thing that's very secretive and mysterious, and they do strange things. And that doesn't seem like a good way to encourage responsible use.
Yes.
So for us, so much of it is really just we have her smell wine all the time when we have wine, or when she's at the distillery, I'm asking her to smell the whiskey that's coming out and explaining the reasons that it smells the way it does, or asking her to feel the surface tension on the distillate. And it's interesting how much for her it ends up becoming this really uninteresting sort of thing that her dad does. And the craziest thing too with her was having Dick Stoll around so often. I used to explain to her how amazing Dick was, and to her it was just like a grandfather figure that was hanging out.
Right.
But again, just like her sitting on Dick Stoll's lap, where I'm like, sweetheart, you don't realize that you're sitting on like a national treasure's lap, and like, you know, that he's giving you the time of day and is so happy to have you there. And again, it just with kids, it's just amazing what they can normalize or what they get used to.
I'm glad to hear you talk about that, because I do the same thing with Penny. You know, if there's a distillation around, or like if I get a sample or something from somebody for distillers talk, or something that's really impressive or something that's really bad, either way, I'll show it to her. You know, obviously not let her taste it, but she can smell it. And you know, she's been around distillation her whole life, and oftentimes, you know, in the moment, just like with you, even though she's only 8, you know, her reaction is that this is the most boring, stupid thing that I've ever seen. But then we'll go somewhere and she'll be talking to somebody, and they'll, you know, an adult will ask her about her dad being a distiller or whatever. And then she'll say something, and I'll hear her say it, and I'll be like, how do you, like, in very technical information, how do you know that? She's like, well, I heard you say it. Okay.
Right?
Well,
And your
some of
heart
this
just
is
like
sticking.
swells.
Right.
No,
Exactly.
it's so awesome. It really is. And I also work with my wife, so I've said to her in the past, she's talked to me about our boiler and the way it runs, and I was like, I don't know that I've ever loved you more than when you've talked to me about our boiler and how it runs during distillation. She's like, I really hate you right now. But
Oh
okay.
man, we need a shirt now that just says "Talk Boiler to Me."
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it. Oh, that's fantastic.
Well, real quick here, I will throw this in as a sort of along the same lines as what you were just talking about. But that's, you know, that's one of the reasons why I name things after people who didn't get their due credit here in Southern Indiana. It's not just to keep their memory alive, not just to have their name on the bottle, and not just to hopefully influence what I was trying to get out of that bottle, but the number of times that I've gotten to have a great conversation while doing a tasting because of the names on the bottle that are not names that anybody from outside this region would ever know. And to be able to tell those stories of people that were, you know, literally, some of them were literally erased from our history books, but it starts such great conversations, right? And then to have people like, and I'm sure you have this even like with, you know, with Dick's legacy, etc., or even probably with your own family to some degree too. The people that come out of the woodwork because I named a bottle after somebody, like the descendants that show up that you don't even know
It's
exist.
so amazing. It really is so cool.
Yeah, and that's literally like sometimes there's a gentleman, I won't say his name on here or even say the name of the whiskey that we named it after his great grandfather. When he walked through the door, I'd never met him before. He didn't tell me he was coming or anything. I just happened to be standing in the tasting room, and I looked at the door, and dude, that was the closest to like a flesh and blood ghost I ever saw, because he looked just like the gentleman on the bottle. And I was like, that has to be somebody coming for this bottle.
When again, how is that not raising spirits, or the closest thing that you and I will get to reliably and repeatedly doing that?
Yeah, it's true life necromancy.
It really is. And I think for so many people, and if you really ask people and truly get them to admit it, in a lot of people's mind, history is black and white. They don't acknowledge it consciously, but if you really drill down, they'll be like, oh yeah, that was happening in color.
Mm-hmm.
So giving them those modern sense memories and associating it with a story of someone that they would have never known existed, man, that's just such a cool thing. It's, I mean, in some way akin to like a stone tape theory sort of thing, where
Yeah.
Again, those, I don't know, that's just so cool to me.
Yeah. Well, Eric, this has been a blast, and I look forward to future conversations with you. And I know that you and I have some projects potentially in the works that I'm excited to tell people about in the future.
Oh, likewise, man.
Yeah, just say there's some cool stuff probably going to happen down the road here. But tell people where they can find you and Stoll and Wolfe out there on the internet. So
Sure. So we are Stoll and Wolfe. You can find us on our website, Stoll, Stoll, and A-N-D, Wolfe, WOLFE.com. You can find our products on MASH networks. They distribute us to 48 different states throughout the country. We also can ship to consumers in the state of Pennsylvania. We've got locations in Pittsburgh. We have our tasting room in Lidditz. We also have a shared tasting room in Philadelphia as well. So if you visit our site, you can find all those locations. And if you have any questions, just reach out via email or give us a call.
and for those of you who are listening, don't sleep on the Stoll and Wolfe whiskey either. It is really, really great stuff. I had the pleasure of having some of the Rosenrye distillate that you did while we were down in Virginia. And I've had, several of your products in the past. We've had you on Distillers Talk podcast with Christy, etc. Guys, if you like whiskey at all, if you like bourbon, give rye a try, and give Stoll and Wolfe a try in particular, because what they're doing is so much different than the ryes that are on the market for many of the big producers that you might otherwise know. It really has very little in common with any of those things that are commonly available out there. So yeah, go out and support Stoll and Wolfe.
Thank you so much, man. That's really high praise considering the source.
Oh, I really enjoy it. I'll be waiting on my free bottle. No, I'm just messing with you, man.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Your residual check will be in the mail, man. That's
yes.
It's worth every penny. I swear.
Right. All $5 worth.
I was gonna say the hardest $5 you ever earned. It was. You feel so dirty after that.
Well, you guys can find us at thealchemistcabinet.com. So, all right, man. Well, we'll catch up with you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks again for the chance to talk.
The world is a confusing place, filled with all manner of shimmering distractions that take our conscious mind and our immortal souls and subvert them into the most basal of human emotions. Can any one of us who considers ourselves a spiritual being truly look around the carnival at the barkers, performers, and the caged animals and believe, even momentarily, that any of this is as it should be? My name is Alan Bishop, the alchemist of the Black Forest of Indiana, distiller, historian, occasional tinker, reenactor, and your host of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Have you ever noticed the world isn't quite what it presents itself to be? That something is just a little off kilter, just a little out of focus. Perhaps that movement you caught out of the corner of your eye was more than a shadow, that weight on your shoulder more than fatigue. I have lived my whole life like this, aware, awake, and waiting for the next experience, positive or negative. Always apprehensive, always analyzing. I believe that spiritual warfare is real. I believe from societal observation that others are becoming acutely aware. I believe that many are being influenced by forces unknown in a negative and spiritually deprived way. I see soft disclosure in every corner of pop culture. Join us as we pull back the curtain, as the veil thins, and reach with us into the ether to reclaim the truth on If You Have Ghosts, you have everything. Hey guys, back with season 4 of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. And today we have one of my very best friends in the world, Erik Wolfe from Stoll and Wolfe Distillery out in Pennsylvania. Ironically, Erik and I had not ever really met in person until just recently at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And you know, it was kind of bromance at first sight. So
It's so true. Especially my wife. Just ask her. She's like, "Okay, your new girlfriend, or not girlfriend, boyfriend, but yes."
yeah, now you're going on this ghost show and wasted an hour on Friday. That's
Oh,
awesome.
she's happy to get rid of me. So in that way, that's no problem. But yeah,
But no, Erik and I really had a good time out at Mount Vernon, and as you guys will hear or have heard potentially on One Piece at a Time, Sacred and Profane, it was kind of a spiritual experience for me that led into some other spiritual experiences. Just a week later, involving the band Blind Melon and visiting the grave of Shannon Hoon. But Erik and I were able to talk some real distilling and also some spiritual aspects and some personal aspects of life. And I really appreciate it. And I know that Erik has an open mind. The two of us didn't have that different of a childhood at all, being separated between Pennsylvania and Indiana, not truly very different at all. So I have not Erik has not briefed me on what he's going to talk about. I have not coached him on anything he's going to talk about. I just told him if he had any weirdness in his life or any spiritual things he wanted to talk about, or whether it involved distilling or didn't involve distilling, that's all good and it all fits the concept of this show. So with that being said, Erik, if you'd like to talk to people a little bit more about Stoll and Wolfe before we start and who you are, where you came from, your background, then we can go right into any of the high strangeness you want to talk about.
fantastic. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, again, meeting in person for the first time at Mount Vernon was definitely on such hallowed ground. And then, like I was saying to you, the first day we were working there rowing MASH, we've done this in another lifetime. So I don't know how or where. I believe I also followed that up immediately with, "I'm sorry for whatever harebrained scheme I talked you into that got us killed in the last life," which I have no doubt you would have no trouble believing. So,
Oh,
anyway,
well, there were for sure some heresies there or something. I'm positive of
yeah,
that.
exactly. Talking heliocentric universes or some. So yeah, so thank you. So yeah, I'm part of the Wolfe in Stoll and Wolfe. I'm fortunate to work with my wife Aviana and my father Jim. And the Stoll and Wolfe is our partner, mentor, and friend Dick Stoll. Dick unfortunately passed away about 3 years ago now, and oh man, what a great mentor to have! Just such a knowledgeable man, such a kind man, and definitely someone who really just had so much knowledge to bestow, but really was very generous of spirit in sharing, and certainly set the tone, I think, for a lot of our journey with Stoll and Wolfe. And so much of our journey with Stoll and Wolfe and distilling is, I don't know if you want to call it supernatural necessarily, but certainly some events that I can't necessarily explain that sort of guided us on our path and sort of have kept us on that path, where the origin of Stoll and Wolfe was my wife and I. Actually, this time of year, ironically enough, we were living in New York. I was born and raised in Lancaster County. Left Lancaster County, was living in New York City. Had met my wife, and we were considering coming back to Lancaster County to start a family. But for us, after living in New York for so long, the idea of going back to Pennsylvania for me was really exciting. For my wife, was kind of terrifying, having never lived outside of New York. So she was asking me as we're driving home from having spent Thanksgiving with my family here in Pennsylvania back to New York, well, what would we possibly do to be able to support ourselves if we moved back there? And yeah, it sounds like something out of a movie. It sounds like something I'm making up, but I kid you not, at that moment we were passing Distillery Road. It's the old Michter's site. So I had looked up and I was like, well, actually, oddly enough, nobody is preserving that history in this area. And working in New York